As of the recording of this video, the Linus Tech Tips Linux Gaming Challenge is still not available on YouTube, so I have not had a chance to watch it because I do not have a Floatplane sub. But Linus and Luke did talk about the challenge on the recent episode of the WAN Show, and surprising absolutely nobody ever, r/Linux and a bunch of other, Linuxy forums are very angry about what he said. They're quote mining and trying to find every possible way they can make Linus sound like he's absolutely insane or how he's horrible at Linux or shouldn't be using Linux. But you know what? Linus actually did make some fairly valid points. Not to say everything he said made sense, but I'll leave a link to the full 30-minute segment down below, and today I sort of wanted to go over some of the things he said and whether they actually make any sense. The first thing I want to address is probably the only really dumb thing Linus said throughout the entire 30 minutes. So he bought 4 copies of Minecraft Dungeons for him and his family. Now, he bought these copies on the Windows Store because I guess the Steam version wasn't available yet. And that's fine. He was playing it perfectly fine over on Windows. And apparently there is a guide on Lootress, but that guide is out of date and doesn't work anymore, which is probably due to the fact that Minecraft Dungeons is a UWP app, and UWP stuff just doesn't work properly through Wine. Anyway, doesn't matter the reason why, he wasn't able to play this on Linux. And his main argument here was that he bought these 4 copies of Minecraft Dungeons, he should be able to play the version available on Steam. Firstly, this problem has nothing to do with Linux. This is a problem with you supporting the Microsoft Store, which, honestly, don't do. Microsoft has plenty of other ways to make money from you. The second problem is, this is basically the same argument as saying, I bought a game on the PS4, I own the game, why can't I play the Xbox One version? You bought a game on a platform and then you expect it to work on a different platform. Windows and Linux are different platforms, and this is without even getting to the problem of supporting proprietary stores, where you bought it from the Microsoft Store, and Microsoft can just say, well, you're not allowed to play it anywhere else because you bought it in our walled garden. This is why a lot of people support stores like GOG, where you have these DRM-free games, or they'll just go and acquire it through questionably legal means. However, companies like Valve and the developers behind Wine are trying to sort of lower the barrier between the different operating systems, and it is getting easier to run Windows games on Linux. It's just that you can't expect everything to run. A bit later on, Linus brought up troubleshooting and said the troubleshooting process on Linux is worse than it is on Windows. Now, regardless of what operating system you're on, troubleshooting is going to be an inherently technical process. If you're just some regular user, let's say your grandmother's web browser breaks, she's not going to sit there and say, okay, so I can open up this tool and this tool and this tool to check where things might be breaking. She's just going to say, application is broken, I'm gonna go do my gardening or something. So on Linux, it is incredibly common to open up an application directly from your terminal window, and as that is the case, it is very common to see applications just dump a bunch of text directly to the window. And this text, if you know what you're actually looking for, can be incredibly useful when you're trying to debug an application, trying to troubleshoot, trying to find why something isn't actually working properly. And while Windows is going to have that in some cases, and some applications are going to have log files, in a lot of cases, it's not shown to the user in any way they can easily find it. You just need to know it's already there. And what you'll typically get is, here is a box, app broken, contact support, and that's basically all you get. Now, both Luke and Linus keep saying troubleshooting throughout this process, but they don't mean troubleshooting. What they actually mean is Linux support. So, due to having, a much wider range of variables, your distro, your kernel, your desktop environment, the extra software outside of the desktop environment, trying to find someone with the exact same setup as you who can actually help you, directly through what you're working with can be incredibly difficult. But if you want to do the troubleshooting yourself, troubleshooting is considerably better on Linux. Now we go into the bit where I pretty much just agree with Linus. So he says his experience with the Linux desktop has not aligned with what people have said it was going to be like. One of those things is not having to restart between updates, and honestly, I genuinely hate that people share this around saying this is something that you can very easily do. Yes, you can go and, fix everything up between a system update and make it so you don't have to restart. Or you could not spend 30 minutes doing that and just reboot the computer. Both Luke and Linus complained that sleep functionality just was not behaving consistently on their desktop environments. For Luke, his wouldn't sometimes wake up. For Linus, his sometimes wouldn't go to sleep. And sleep on Linux is a very, hacked together system. It's just a bunch of moving parts that weren't designed to work together that just happen to do so. Sometimes system D will act weird. Maybe you're not using system D, maybe using some other system. Maybe the program itself is going to act weird. Maybe you have some random process running the background that is stopping the sleep from happening. Lots of things can just get in the way of sleep working properly. And they both also complained about not being able to force close applications, even though everyone said you can do that. Now, I don't know how they were trying to force close apps, because if I send a SIG term to a program and the program does not kill itself, my computer has frozen and nothing else on my computer is working. My guess is they're probably trying to quit an application from a GUI, and a lot of GUI applications don't actually close stuff properly. And speaking of GUIs, they were a core focus around what Linus and Luke actually complained about. One of the things they said is that fonts and text sizes were all over the place on their desktop environment, and yes, that absolutely is going to happen. So when you use something like Windows or macOS, they have UI libraries built around that operating system that are sort of heavily integrated into the system, and when you make an application on that operating system, you're sort of expected to use that. Whereas on Linux, it's a bit more of a free-for-all. Now, when you use a desktop environment and you use apps that are designed around that desktop environment, they should all align together, otherwise it's sort of, a bad desktop environment. But anything outside of that, let's say you use Steam or Spotify, or you download a terminal outside of that desktop environment, that is going to stick out like a sore thumb. Linux isn't one big blob designed by one group. It's a bunch of small independent groups. Some of them work together, some of them do things that are completely incompatible with each other, and you get this sort of hodgepodge of an operating system, which for some people like me is absolutely great, but for others, I can totally see why that wouldn't be appealing. And I don't have anything to say about this bit, I just pretty much agree.
Dolphin is a piece of garbage. I'm sorry.
This is gonna be it's gonna be really.
It's a perfectly functional file manager, but he is kind of onto something there. And because of his experience with Dolphin, he ended up switching to Nautilus at some point, and he seems at least satisfied with that. And while he was still using Dolphin, he tried to do something that on Windows and macOS is just a default feature at this point that a couple of years ago wouldn't have seemed that weird. So he opened up a zip, and he couldn't go and drag the file directly out of that. To go and access the files in it, he had to go and unzip it and then move the files out. Now, a couple of years back, you would just download WinRAR and do this on Windows. I guess Linus just forgot about that. I know it's a standard feature on Windows and macOS at this point, but there are applications on Linux that are going to do this. To complain that a program doesn't let you just seems like a weird complaint to make. Now, because we are talking about Linux, at some point the terminal had to be brought up. Because whenever you try to do anything on Linux, whether it's try to modify a config file, move a file, install something, someone is just going to say, do it from the terminal's going to be easier. But they made a point that I really agree with, and I've said multiple times. The terminal scares away the average user. One of the things that Linus tried to do is something that is very easy to do on Windows or macOS or even in certain desktop environments like Cinnamon. That is edit system folders using a GUI, because not everyone who wants to use Linux wants to use a GUI for everything, but apparently with Dolphin, you just cannot open it with sudo. It just will not work. And he went to try to look up a fix for this and found a post on the Manjaro forums, which he didn't say what the post was, but his description was enough for me to find it. So this person asks, when will Dolphin be open with sudo? Sudo Nautilus is okay. Nautilus actually will run perfectly fine with root privileges, but sudo Dolphin is not. And the first response, never. It's bad practice, specifically disallowed, and there's not really any good reason to do so. No, sudo Nautilus is not okay either, but it will be inconvenient when I try to copy files and paste them into non-home folders via UI. In what scenarios do you actually need to do that? In any scenario, you would copy a file. And he does give a reason from a security perspective why giving an application like this elevated privileges is a bad idea. The problem, though, is it's the exact same reason why giving literally any code on your system elevated privileges is a bad idea. You give the code elevated privileges, the code can do anything. That's the reason why we don't run root as a default. I personally do a lot of stuff from my terminal. I understand the syntax, I know the commands to use, I use Vim to edit my config files. I am just used to working through my system like this. However, I don't understand this hesitance that a lot of people on Linux have to doing stuff with a GUI. I don't think that it's inherently a bad idea to want to go and, modify my grub config with a graphical text editor and moving files around with a graphical file manager. If you want people to actually be using Linux, that's something that desktop environments really need to start embracing. And sure, they're probably better than they were 5 or 10 years ago. But one of the things that Linus said is the command line needs to stop being seen as a crutch. What this basically means is that everything you want to do on Linux can be done from a terminal. And that's great for people like me and most of the people watching this video. But if you say to a regular person, hey, you can go and set up Proton, but you need to go and do this stuff from your terminal. The instant you say terminal or command line, their brain turns off and they stop paying attention. And that's perfectly fine because not everyone needs to be technically savvy. But Luke did extend this to say that not all of Linux needs to change. It's not like Gentoo, Arch, Void, Bedrock, anything like this needs to just become a noob-friendly distro. That's never going to happen, and it honestly shouldn't happen. But if you're a Pop! OS, you're an Ubuntu, you're a Mint, anything like this, you really need to make it so if someone uses this, they never need to open up a terminal if they don't want to. One of the things that was said about GUIs that I know is going to ruffle some feathers is dragging and dropping files is objectively faster than a terminal. Now, I mostly disagree with this, but there is a kernel of truth there. If we're moving around, like a couple of files to the exact same location, you know what? Dragging and dropping is just faster. I don't care what anybody says, unless you have a typing speed of, 300 words per minute, it's gonna be quicker just to move your mouse, unless you use like a ThinkPad nipple. But if we are moving files to different locations, we're renaming those files, we are bulk renaming files, we are making symlinks and also moving files, all of these things which are fairly common use cases, then yeah, doing it from a terminal is going to be faster. Especially when it gets to work that you might want to automate. Let's say you offload images from your camera, you want to go and bulk rename them, and then move them to a directory that is named after the current date. You can do all of that by hand, but you can also write a script to do it and do it basically instantly. And the last of Linus's points I want to mention is before you declare that Linux is better, maybe you're just more used to it. Now, Linux is objectively better for privacy because, you don't have Windows literally turning on their telemetry every time you turn it off between updates. It's better for customizability. It's better for actually owning your computer. And even if you just want to save some money, it's better because you don't have to pay for your operating system. But if those things don't matter to you, if you don't care about free software, if you don't care about privacy, you don't care about security, maybe Windows is going to be a better user experience for you. I know that some people don't want to hear that, but for some people, yes, the experience is more important than all of those other things. Now, some people have said that Linus should not have been using Manjaro KDE because you shouldn't be using Manjaro if you are completely new to Linux. I completely agree with this, and I would never recommend Arch-based distros to a new user, and I feel like it's really, really irresponsible when you see people actually doing so. You have some names in mind, but if you go to Google and you look up best beginner Linux distro, of the top 5 lists, do you know how many of them don't mention Manjaro? One of them does not mention it. So Manjaro KDE seems like a good option if you're just looking at what these lists are, and people seem to make it seem like a good option. If it's not a good option, Linux blogs and Linux YouTubers really should stop pushing it as a beginner distro. Now, I didn't cover every single thing they said because I would be here longer than the actual segment was, but overall, I pretty much agree with what Linus has said. I do obviously have my disagreements with some of the things where he was just completely off base, but when it comes to the general user experience things, yeah, he actually does understand what people are actually looking for from a general computing experience. It's almost like he runs a massive channel about the general computing experience. After seeing this segment, I am even more excited to see what is actually going to be included inside of the Linux Challenge videos themselves. I know there's going to be things they didn't bring up, there's going to be some repeats, but I'm excited to see, what hardware problems Linus has had, what things that, Luke hasn't actually had to deal with, because from what I've heard, Linus's experience has been pretty bad, but Luke's has been just, the general teething experience of using Linux. I don't know whether I will cover each of the individual episodes, but I might do so I'll let you guys know. So that's going to be it for me, and if you like this video and you want to support the channel and become one of these amazing people over here, please go check out my Patreon subscribers-only Bearer Pay, linked in the description down below. I've got a podcast called Tech Over Tea available basically anywhere, and I'm almost certainly going to be talking about the Linux Challenge as it actually occurs. I've got a gaming channel called Brodie Robertson Plays, where I live stream twice a week, upload about 5 or so YouTube shorts, and this channel is also available over on Odyssey. That's going to be it for me. It is very humid today, and my hair looks ridiculous, and I'm out.